Welcome back. This time on At the Lathe we're going to dissect this small apple tree into turning blanks, so stick around. Last weekend I heard some music coming from my neighbor's yard. I looked over the fence to discover that he was cutting down a small apple tree, so I asked him if I could have the tree, and he obliged and even brought it over and dropped it off my driveway for me. Now, as soon as you get a freshly cut tree like that, you want to start cutting it up into your turning blanks and sealing it as soon as possible. So I didn't really have time to get the camera out at the time and show how I go about cutting up a tree. So what I did is I took all the pieces and I reassembled them like a puzzle back into a tree, and I thought I could share with you guys how I go about the thought process of how I go through and cut up a tree into blanks. Now keep in mind, every tree is going to be a little bit different. As well, depending on what kind of work you do will influence how you think about going and cutting up this tree. I tend to do a lot of natural edge and wing bowls, and so a lot of what I've done when I cut up this tree had everything to do with that kind of work. So starting with the base, I have a nice straight section at the bottom of the tree, and so typically what I'll do is I'll section this off into logs that can be used for bowl blanks for either conventional bowls or for natural edge. And so where I want to make my cut line, what I want to do first is I want to measure the diameter of the log. So I have about a 9-inch diameter log here, and I'm going to take that 9 inches and I'm going to mark off the log about 9 inches, maybe a little bit more. And the basic idea here is that once I split this log in half, I want this inside surface to be approximately square, and that's going to maximize the diameter of a bowl I can get out of this piece. Now when I go to split this log in half, I want to make sure that my cut line goes through the pith, that is the center of the growth rings right about here. I missed it a little bit. And that's because the pith is very unstable, and you want to eventually remove that pith from the piece. Now on a larger log, I might actually make 2 cuts, and then what I can do is the piece on either side of the pith, I can actually use that as a board, or I could use it for spindle blanks for turning or something else, and that way I really make sure I avoid the pith. But on a small piece like this, I don't worry about that too much. And you can even, a lot of times, if it's a large log, I could have used that piece and make something really nice. I once made a nice hand plane for doing box work out of a piece of pear from a section like that. Now, on a trunk, usually the pith is going to be right near the center of the log. And as far as where to make my slice, I can make that slice at any angle, as long as I'm going through the pith. And if I had a log that was perfectly round, I might try to look for some cracks, see if there's any cracks in the pith, and that way I can make my cut align with those cracks and eliminate those cracks. If there's no cracks and it's not a round log, you can kind of play with, kind of imagine, maybe even take a ruler or some kind of divider and try to imagine the shapes of the bowls you might get depending on how you make your cut. On this particular log, you may notice that the pith is a little bit offset, and that's because the tree was leaning a little bit, so it tended to be more tension on one side than the other, and so I have to sort of make an offset. Notice my cut is not right on the center of the log. Now I could have made the cut this way, but then all this fatter part of the log is going to dry differently than this narrower part of the log. You can see the growth rings are much tighter here and wider there. You can do that. There is one thing I've done with a bowl that way, with a wing bowl, where I left the bowl section lined up with the pith and I ended up having an extra long wing. But usually what I'll do is I'll try to divide it from the fat side to the skinny side. That way this side will all dry at one rate and this will dry at a separate rate. That way I don't have a mixed rate of drying between the two blanks. And so what you end up with is one blank will be a little bit shallower of a bowl and the other blank will be a little bit deeper of a bowl. These blanks could be used for either a conventional bowl, in which case this top surface would end up being the rim of the bowl, Or I could flip it around and make this the top of the bowl, and what I would end up with is a natural edge bowl. A lot of times though, with the very bottom piece, you'll find that the bark gets a little bit banged up from the process of cutting it down, and that's going to get in the way of my natural edge. A nice natural edge here. Also, you can see there's some extra chainsaw gashes on there, so I'm probably not going to get a nice natural edge of these. So these are most likely be turned into conventional bowls. Now, a lot of times, if I know I'm going to be doing a conventional, I didn't do it this time, but if I know I'm going to turn these into conventional bowls, I may also try to nip off the corners to try to round this out a little bit better. Because a lot of turners will take their blanks to the bandsaw and turn them into rounds, but I usually don't do that. I usually just mount them straight on a lathe, and I'll cut off the corners to make my job a little bit easier. Now, moving on to these next two sections, it's just more of the same. I still have some more straight sections here, but I will recheck the diameter, because the diameter tends to get smaller. So here I got about 8.5 inches, and so I'll make my next cut. It looks like I did about 9, but a little over 8.5. And now these pieces, same issue with the pith being offset, but the bark is in pretty good condition, so I can use these. I'll probably use these for natural edge bowls. All right, moving on to the next piece in the tree, we have a small crotch right here, and actually working with crotches is one of my favorite things to do, because you can get some really cool effects. Now, as far as how you slice this, so as far as how to section this one off, there's no strict formula like there is with the straight logs. You just kind of have to guess. And what I'll usually do is I'll usually try to cut it not too far above the top of the crotch right here. And then as far as splitting it though, it's pretty direct. What you want to do is you're going to have 3 pith points. You're going to have a pith in one of the 2 branches, and you're going to have a pith on the base. And essentially you want to try to find a plane such that you want to cut right down that line, and you want to hit all 3 of those piths. And if you get it right, what you should have is you'll see the heartwood running up both sides of the tree like that. And also we're trying to eliminate as much of the pith as we can. Now, what's really nice about crotches is this small, let me see which one looks better. Here you can see a lot more here. Right where the tree separates, the branches separate, you get this nice feather figure right here. And now on a large crotch, on a large tree, I've seen pieces made entirely of just the feather. But on a small crotch piece like this, you don't have a lot. And now if I was to try to make a conventional bowl out of this, I would have my rim on the bowl or along on the top surface here, and I would cut away most of this feather. So what I usually do is one of 2 things with a small crotch like this. If there's a small, sometimes on this piece the feather goes on pretty deep into the bowl. Sometimes it'll be just right around here. And what I'll do in that case is I'll do a winged bowl, and I'll try to play with the size and the position of the bowl section of that winged bowl to try to keep as much of this feather figure on the rim of the bowl. So all this will end up being a rim, and the bowl section will be in the middle. And that way I can keep some of this feather figure right at the crotch. Now, if the feather goes deep into the crotch like this one does, the other thing I can do is I can turn it over and do a natural edge bowl. And I'll keep the bottom relatively flat, so this whole feather figure will be embedded right in the bottom of the bowl. And the other prerequisite of doing a natural edge with a crotch is, instead of getting 2 humps like I would get with a standard log, I get a bump here and I get a lump here, or I guess you can call them wings too on a natural edge. But instead of having 2 lobes, I'm going to have 3 lobes, because I've got 3 branches. 1, 2, and 3. And the other thing is they're all going to be a little bit different. A lot of times you'll have different sized branches, so you get a very asymmetrical. I really like that effect, having a nice asymmetrical 3-lobed natural edge bowl. And sometimes you'll even get, if you have 2 branches that divide nice and evenly into a Y, that you'll get actually look like a heart-shaped bowl. as well. But this one, so this one, since that feather goes in pretty deep, I'll probably end up making a flat bottom bowl. I might do one in one. I might do one wing bowl, and then the other, maybe on the other side, the sister piece, I'll do the natural edge. All right, so this next piece on the tree is also a crotch, but as I open it's got quite a bit of branch and a lot of void right here. And as soon as I open this up and split it, you can see I've got a bark inclusion almost all the way down, and you can see it even running down. You can even see it running through the bottom. So I have to be really careful with this one. I might try to figure out. I thought it'd be really cool to have a wing bowl and leave all this as a void. It'd be strictly an artistic piece. So have the void run right down into the bottom of the bowl. But I am going to have to be careful with this piece, because if I was to just take this and throw this on the lathe, it's very easy for this piece to separate and break off. So I'm going to have to use some kind of reinforcement. If I go that way, either some kind of reinforcement that is later going to get cut away, or maybe some kind of integrated reinforcement where I might use some stitching or some splines to hold it together and add to the effect. But I do have to be really careful. You want to watch out for these bark inclusions like this. You can see it travel right down the side. That's going to weaken this log, and having this break off is only half the problem. The other problem is now you're going to have this unbalanced thing swinging on your lathe. So keep in mind that you look for, as you take apart a log, make sure you look for different flaws and stuff that might cause you trouble later on. So this part, these two pieces I'm going to have to set aside and think about what I'm going to actually do with those. So now that we're getting past the crotch, this next piece is really starting to get a lot smaller. The diameter here, we're down to looks like 6 inches. And for me, a 6-inch bowl is starting to get kind of small. But one thing I've learned to do, if I really like the wood and I have these pieces that don't have much diameter, is I'll leave the logs extra long, and I'll still split them the way I would a regular conventional bowl or a natural edge bowl. But what I'll do with these is I'll make wing bowls. So I'll have a bowl section maybe in the center, maybe a little bit offset to one side or the other, and I'll leave all the surface, once it's cleaned up, as the rim, and so I'll have a natural edge. This little bit of bark in either side will be a natural edge on my wing bowl. And finally, this last piece, it starts to go off into another crotch again. It doesn't really split into two. This piece doesn't get all the way to where it splits into two branches. So I don't know what I'll do with these yet. I could do another wing bowl like the previous section. It has some neat figure right in here. So maybe I cut these in half, maybe make a little box out of them. I'm not really sure what I'll do with these yet. It's also kind of interesting how the heartwood comes up and just stops right here. Maybe I could work something with that. So these are kind of a lot of times that'll happen. You'll have a couple pieces you're really not sure what to do with, and usually it's best just to set them aside, and maybe you'll see something that'll inspire you, or you'll get some idea at some point. Sometimes you take a stab at it and you end up throwing it in the trash, but that's just part of the learning experience. So, all right, there it is. Who'd have thought you can get so many blanks out of one small apple tree? Now, if you've never done this kind of thing before, hopefully this will help you get started, give you an idea on how to start cutting up a log. And if you have done it before, hopefully there maybe is some new tip that you can gather from this. Maybe the idea, especially with the idea of being able to keep that small feather figure in a crotch. And as you start to learn and get better at cutting up trees and logs, keep in mind the kind of work you do, so you can try to learn how to take the pieces out so you can do that kind of work. Alright, that's what I have for you this time. Let me know if you like this kind of information. What I can do is keep my eye out for other bits of wood and other creative ways to cut them into blanks. Especially a lot of times you'll find the tree already cut up, especially if it's a really large diameter tree, and they'll cut it into sections. Unlike what we do with the base here, they won't cut it the same length as it is in diameter. So now you've got a short log, and there's a lot of creative ways you can still get a pretty good yield out of such a log. So until next time, I'm Brian Havens, and thanks for watching.